Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz. I'm the Rabbi of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm speaking to you from the pulpit of my congregation. My talk is entitled, A Final Resting Place. Friends, this is the 18th anniversary of my series of weekly messages. My very first essay, shared electronically and inviting your comments and queries, started with this Torah portion, the 5th week of the Genesis cycle in our biblical lectionary. At that time, I spoke about the significance of the verse, Abraham set out to lament for Sarah and to weep for her. Genesis 23, verse 2. I was impressed that before getting lost in the details of Abraham's negotiations to buy the cave of Machpelah as Sarah's final resting place, clearly the focus of the chapter, the Bible pauses to note the emotional impact on Abraham of the passing of his wife. After many years, I returned to that Bible story. I understand that it is mostly about staking the claim of Abraham to the land of Canaan, but the narrative transcends that particular agenda. The narrative also tells us of the importance of having a physical final resting place, a tomb, or in our own days, a grave. Why should that be? Why should it be important that there would be a place where one can say, Po nikbar, here lies? As part of my answer, let me remind you of a dialogue in an Israeli film that I have shown my students many times, Under the Domim Tree. The film is set in Israel in the early years of the independence of the state, the early 1950s. It portrays a chapter in the lives of a group of children and teens. Most of them are orphans, specifically child survivors of the Holocaust, whose parents had been murdered. The lead character, Avia, is not a Holocaust orphan. She is in the children's village because her one surviving parent is insane. The dedicated staff of the Israeli youth villages to whom the film is dedicated devoted resources and skill to help the children heal and prepare for successful adult lives. The lead character, Avia, receives a photograph of her deceased father, sent to her by her aunt. In the course of the story, a remark by one of her peers, a troubled girl, Mira, launches Avia on a journey of discovery. Mira, whose own murdered parents had no grave, says, Kever, ha'ikar hu sheyihiyeh kever, a grave. The essential thing is that there should be a grave. Avia pieces together the stray bits of information that she has to find her father's grave in the old pre-1948 section of the Jewish cemetery in Haifa. Once there, she cleans the stone and offers a heartfelt prayer that her father should watch over her afflicted mother and over her too. The actress portraying Avia, Kaipo Cohen, turns in a wonderful performance. She portrays the rush of emotions that her teenage character feels. Sadness mixed with gratitude and a sense of finally achieving grounding at finding where her father's body reposes. I understand that mix of emotions in my own work. One of the emotional high points of my year of service is to take congregants to the graves of relatives around the time of the high holidays. The congregants are reflective, somber, sometimes still sad, depending on the length of time they have had to live on after their loss. They are frequently motivated to reminisce about the lives that their loved ones had lived, and about the ways in which those lives continue to shape their own. they are by and large settled to know that they still somehow preserve a connection to the loved ones living on in their memory, living on in heaven. This is also my experience. Most years, my wife and daughter and I take a pilgrimage to our family graves in New Jersey. We can't be there at the season of the new year, so we go when we can, often in the summer. The experience is always moving. To see the stones accumulating on top of the monument stones is satisfying in a sense, a concrete testimonial that my loved ones have not been forgotten. A tangible expression of the desire to reach past all borders and touch a loved one. One time, half a year into my bereavement, I was having a hard day. I went to my father's grave in the midst of a downpour. The sky was crying. I was crying. And then I had cried all my tears, and I felt restored, if weak. Another visit to my parents' grave remains vivid in my memory. My two brothers and I each had tasks to perform in clearing the family house and preparing it for sale. My job was to go through the 10,000 books in the family library, decide which ones would go to which schools and which libraries, and get them there. It was physically demanding work. It was what I needed, a labor of love. It allowed me to channel energies productively and accomplish the work of mourning, and it is work, the work of mourning. When the shelves were empty, although my parents' furniture was still in the house, suddenly it felt to me that their presence was gone. They were such bibliophiles. At the Jewish Theological Seminary, my parents' fellow students composed a ditty in their honor, whose refrain was, "David and Esther and the library." They were such bibliophiles that the absence of the books was the visual cue that suddenly moved me to the stage of acceptance of the finality of my loss. At that point, I simply had to get to the cemetery. It was as if, in the words of the prophet Ezekiel, "Vatisa'eni ruach," a wind lifted me up and carried me. I drove the hour from the house to the cemetery as if time had suspended. When I got to the grave, another heartfelt cry, and then peace. That was halfway through the 11 months of reciting Kaddish. I continued to recite it in obedience to Jewish tradition until the end. But the pain that had animated my earlier recitation was gone. The sense that I had personally needed that recitation had ended. I had arrived at the end of the journey of bereavement. The cemetery was the place where I could acknowledge that. To return to our Bible story, as is its way, the Bible tells us only a little bit, leaving the larger narrative to the reader's creative imagination. We know that Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah and buried Sarah there. We know that Abraham himself was buried there, Genesis 25, verses 9 through 10. We do not know if and how often Abraham went there to commune with the spirit of the wife of his youth, his partner in pilgrimage. But I imagine that he did. Abraham and Sarah had journeyed. They had suffered losses and persevered. They had crossed each other and endured. They had advanced the human condition by their extraordinary paths through life. What Sarah meant to Abraham is not likely to have ended, even though he married again and fathered 6 sons. In my mind's eye, I see Abraham at Sarah's grave, thinking that this will be his resting spot too. and perhaps taking some solace from the knowledge that when he would be gathered unto his kinfolk, ne'asaf el amav, to use the language of the Bible, the specific reunion of his physical substance would be with the bones of Sarah. I don't picture Abraham as a romantic. I don't imagine him thinking about Sarah as Mark Twain's Adam thinks about Eve in the diaries of Adam and Eve that, quote, wheresoever she was, there was Eden. But I do imagine that Abraham understood that his soul was bound up with Sarah's in ways too powerful to ignore as the seasons rolled on. In the profound poetry of the Psalms, the grave is called Duma, the realm of silence. But in the ongoing Jewish imagination, the grave was a place where life's concerns still echoed in the mind's ear of all those who had reason to visit and who went back there. As a closing prayer, let me adapt the traditional Jewish phrase of condolence. We say to the bereaved, Hamakom yinachem etchem. May the place, quote, the place, bring you comfort. That word, hamakom, the place, is a synonym for God because God is in every place. God is omnipresent. But in this context, I would like to take the word hamakom in that sentence more literally. May the place, the grave, provide comfort for you when you visit it in your own hour of bereavement. When you are walking in the valley of the shadow of death, know that God is with you. And when you visit the graves of loved ones, know that God, who redeems the living and the dead, is the channel by which we remain bound in the unbroken chain of generations.